Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Ship, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pieces for My Puzzle. I'm your host, Nikki Ship. Thank you so much for joining us today. Last week, we had a wonderful and amazing opportunity to speak with Miss Randi-Lee Bowslaugh, and we're going to continue our talk with her today. If you didn't get a chance to tune into that episode, please do. The perspective and the conversations that we had about her life on the spectrum and her daughter's life on the spectrum are truly amazing and inspiring. So please check it out if you haven't had a chance to do so already. But this week, I'm going to welcome Randi back to the show. Randi, thank you so much for being here today again.
Thank you so much for having me again. I'm so excited. Love your show.
I know. Thank you so much. No, I've been just so excited to have you on the show. And I know we talked a lot about, you becoming an author and your advocacy work and mental health in the last episode. But I do want to kind of continue those conversations. We ended up last week kind of talking about, navigating with the school system. And the one question that I didn't get a chance to ask you that I really want our listeners to hear your message on is, what do you have any advice that you would give to parents that are going through the experience of navigating through the school system with their child who has autism? Because we both have had very similar stories, and you're in Ontario, Canada, and I'm in Arizona in the United States, and we've had very similar experiences even within education advocating for our kids. So I know you gave a couple key questions in the last episode to make sure that they're asking, but do you really have any personal advice for parents of that are maybe going through this experience right now?
Yeah, so something that actually I had to learn the hard way. I had to go pay somebody to teach me therapy.
I know.
One of the hardest things, and we did mention in last episode, is that we get emotionally charged when advocating for our kids because we love them. We want what's best for them. So, I did mention it last time. I said, tell them, I'll think about it.
Yeah.
And then think about it this way with the facts. So when I was going through therapy, my therapist, we were talking about a certain situation, and I was, of course, blowing things out of proportion because that's what I do when I'm depressed. And she goes, well, where's the facts? Can you tell me the facts on that? And I said, no. So she goes, okay, so this person that we're talking about, we're talking about my supervisor at the time. She goes, have they ever given you, a reason to think this way? Well, no. Mm-hmm. Have they ever said this? No. And she was going through all these questions, and it really boiled down to what are the facts? Yeah. So then I started using that with the school. And when the school would start telling me things, I'd go, okay, but wait, what are the facts? Because you're telling me that, for instance, that Lev is getting very disruptive in class. Okay, sure. But what are the facts behind that? Are the facts behind that that you have her sitting beside her bully? Which they did in grade 1. They knew that she was being bullied by this kid, and they sat her beside him. And I had to ask them to move her. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this is what? But again, getting emotionally charged. So then I go, okay, wait, what are the facts here? Okay, we can do that. That is easy. What is another fact? Well, another fact is that she needs more time on this assignment. Okay, that is a fact, right? So we need to put that into place, right? So don't get overly emotional when talking to the school, because that honestly is what they're relying on for making you make quick decisions that are best for them and not best for your kid.
Yeah. And that's such a great way to put it. I think I realized too that there were certain aspects I had to remove myself emotionally from.
Yes.
I did have some pretty major outbursts, though. I do remember one meeting in particular because I was so upset that they wouldn't take the time to understand what I was saying. And I was being factual, that I just went into seeing red and totally had this like volcano of emotions I mean,
Yeah.
I know I got labeled as, Drayson's mom's crazy. Like I know
You were that mom.
I was that mom. I was that mom that went just completely batshit crazy in a meeting. And I remember it was on a Zoom call because it was during the time of COVID. And I got off that call and I was bawling. I was bawling uncontrollably because I could not believe that, one, I had reacted that way, and that, two, that even with me reacting that way, they still couldn't understand or hear the facts of what I was trying to say. And so I think emotionally, we're humans, right? It's so we're emotionally driven all the time, and that's what people don't realize. And so I've told parents the same things. You have to figure out how to almost remove yourself emotionally. So I like how you're relaying it into saying, put it into facts. And I'd have to take a sheet of paper sometimes and write down factually what it was. And then on another column, I'd write exactly how I was feeling.
Yes. And actually taking notes is another really big one, because the school will always take notes, but their notes don't always match your notes.
Yes.
Way back in one of our very early meetings, before I knew all this advocacy stuff, the principal was reading back her notes, and she said something like, and I can't remember exactly because this is like going back to grade 1, but she said something like, okay, so you're saying that Levin never has this problem. I said, that is not what I said. I said, Levin hasn't experienced that at home. I'm not saying that she hasn't experienced it here or at a grocery store. I said at home, where the circumstances are very calm. She has not, right? So I'm like, that is not what I said. So take your own notes, or better yet, record.
I was just going to say, we recorded everything. Here in Arizona, it's a one-party state. So you can record, but that's why I'm mentioning it to our listeners. Like, don't just go recording unless you have their permission. Like, check your state laws first before you do that. But,
right? I don't know what the law here is in Canada.
I was like, please check your laws. But like, if both parties consent, obviously to record, it's okay. But like, we recorded everything, and I remember going back and listening to some of those, and even listening and how upset I got in some of these meetings. It was like it was another person. It didn't even sound like me. It was just the most bizarre thing for me. But listening to some of those recorded conversations, you're exactly right. They would come back and say, oh, okay. And they would say one thing. I'm like, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. And I felt like they were always taking my words and trying to kind of twist them into the narrative of what they wanted and what they were trying to dictate with Drayson's educational career. And I mean, I realize it's only elementary school, but what I kept saying was that these are fundamentals that are going to help him throughout his educational career, because my hope is that my kid's still going to go to college. That's my hope. Maybe you don't see it that way, but it's not, I don't feel as educators that that's for you to decide. It's not for you to say that kid's never going to go to college or not.
Yeah.
That's at least how I feel.
I have a very recent story because Lev did try to go to college.
Okay.
And I think had I known the things I know now back in grade 1 to give her better basis, college might have been more successful. And that's why, again, so glad that you talk about this with people, because maybe they can learn from us and maybe not fumble as much as we might have. But so Lev went into a baking program, absolutely loved it. She got up every day, drove herself to school, showered all the time, things that, again, you take for granted. But showering is optional in her world.
Right.
So she got up and she did the work, and she came home with her baked bread. And then this teacher convinced her to switch from the one baking instructor to her, because she said that she understood how to deal with people with disability. She cornered Lev because, you're in college, and they kept saying, well, college is an adult environment. Okay, but I have been at every single meeting with the school with you. You know she has autism. Plus, she was only 17 at the time. She wasn't 18 yet. Cornered her, convinced her to switch her schedule, which completely changed all of the routine that we had put into place over the previous month to prepare her to go to school. So she's all thrown off because she was cornered. So she just go, okay, sure, whatever. Her timetable didn't change online, so she didn't know exactly the schedule. So she was just basing it day to day on what she was told the previous day. And long story short, the teacher got up in her face, told her that she would never hire somebody that was late to class because there was construction on the highway.
Oh my
Lev didn't know
gosh.
another way to get around the construction, so she was late to class. She couldn't open her locker. She always had to have somebody help her open her locker, which again made her late to class. And just a lot of these other situations. And Lev was getting all heated because, again, when somebody is in your space, you don't have to be autistic for somebody to be in your space and make you uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. I know.
So the teacher's in her space and Lev is starting to raise her voice, and the teacher said, and she goes, well, I have a mental illness. I have a mental condition. And the teacher says, well, no, you have a behavioral condition. And Lev's like, no, that's not what it is. And autism is not behavioral. It's developmental. And so the teacher said, is part of it yelling at me? And so Lev said something she shouldn't have said. She said, if I don't yell, I feel like stabbing someone. Again, it was a burst of anger, but it started this whole big thing because she didn't know what else to do. She didn't know what to say. She needed out of the situation. So she said whatever would get her out of the situation. And so came to blows. She obviously was removed from class for a little while. We had a whole bunch of meetings with the school. The school kept trying to put things into place where some of them were like, yes, I think that would be good. Yes, having her be able to go in half an hour early to prepare would be great. Yes, having her only bake 2 of the 3 breads, that would be great. But then they started saying, well, what about having a support worker with you? And Love's like, I don't need a support worker with me. I need the teacher not to be in my space. And I kept telling them, we had already so in school, it's in elementary, high school, it's called an IEP. Yes. In the college, it was called a letter of accommodation.
Okay, yeah.
In this letter of accommodation. Okay, so in this letter of accommodation, it did state, all of these different things, which were not followed by this teacher. Right. So the school kept saying, well, what could we do? I said, could we maybe follow the things that we already said would work? Because they weren't followed. Could we do the first thing? And so it ended up being that it put Lev into a deep depression again, because she's like, why aren't they just doing what we had pointed out to begin with? Like, why are they trying to change things that we haven't? So it gets easier and it doesn't. Right.
Well, and I remember saying that when I interviewed the school where Drayson's at now. The reason why I was so ecstatic that he got into the school was one of the very key questions that the director asked me. And I know I've mentioned this on previous podcasts, but the director of the school said, "What would you like me to know? What would you like for me to know about Drayson?" And no one had ever asked me that before. Yeah. And I remember thinking, and I said to her, Drayson is a beautiful, bright, intelligent boy who is poorly misunderstood. Because again, the educators where he was were dictating on what they thought was best for him, but really it was because it was best for their schedule, not his. And what they needed and not. And I understand, like I said, I get it with educators. Like, you've got a classroom of 25 kids or whatever. You've got all these other things that's not the only child that you have to pay attention to. I do understand that. But I do think that there's also this balance where you have to look at things differently and you have to be able to be versatile when you're teaching and when you're within education. Mm-hmm. I think we've gotten so boxed in that if you don't fit that cookie cutter mold, then that's it. You're not going to make the cut. And it's sad that I feel that we've also molded some of our educators to think that way as well within formal education. And I think that that's really disheartening. But it's funny that you bring that up because I felt the very same way dealing with in 3rd grade with Drayson, very similar story. Like it was like, but you're changing up the things. And if you put them into a structure situation, and I think that that's what a lot of people do not understand for most people on the spectrum, if you give them structure and you get that in place and you put it in place, they will follow it and they will do extremely well. But if you disrupt the balance, you have to give them time and accommodation to adjust to that. And if they don't adjust fast enough, they get penalized for that, basically. And that's how I felt with Drayson. They were bouncing him around. They were doing all these different things. And then I'm like, but you're not giving him, your recovery time is different than someone who isn't, let's say, for lack of better words, neurodivergent, right? So, and same thing with Drayson. When you speak to him, he has global developmental delay. You have to pause for 5 to 10 seconds before he'll answer you. So imagine saying something and pause for 5 to 10 seconds. And if you don't answer fast enough, then they ask him the question again Then they'd ask the question again. Then they'd ask the question again. And he'd go into a state of overwhelm. And I feel like some people don't always take a step back to think about that. Not everybody, you know, but I think that it's difficult for educators too. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, take a step back for a minute and just pause and maybe be observant and see what you can find out.
Right.
And I didn't see that happening, and it just was so upsetting for me. And I'm sure for you, like, especially now into college and higher education, and then that was it.
Yeah, it was so very frustrating because they kept saying, well, the expectations of the course, I said, okay, here's the expectations of her parent. I want her to get up every day. I want her to drive herself to school, and I want her to attempt to do the class. Mm-hmm. At no point did I say I wanted her to graduate. Sure, of course, that would have been nice.
Right.
But at no point was that on my list of things. My list of things was very different than theirs. But again, they weren't listening because on paper, they want all of their kids to pass. So on paper, they can say we have this success rate.
Yeah.
But your success rate has nothing to do with our success rate.
Right. And the accreditation standards, and that's the other thing. Some people go, oh, you don't understand. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Oh, I do. I was an instructor for a better half of a decade. I taught in higher education. I understand completely. I understand the whole finance side of things, and you see those types of things going down. I understand all of that. But what to me, it still doesn't pose as an answer as to why they just can't take a step back and observe differently, because that's simple and that doesn't cost anything. It doesn't cost anything to just stop and observe differently, and then maybe say, could I change this, still meet what I need within curriculum standards with the student, but teach it maybe a little differently to them so that they absorb it. And that's where I really struggle.
Yeah,
that's where I really struggle. Yeah.
Yeah. So Lev actually thrived during COVID because it was online. And so we would get the material and I would sit there and dissect it all with her and explain it 5 different ways if it took 5 different ways to do it before it absorbed in her brain. Right. Whereas the school, this is how I'm teaching. If you don't like it, well, then you're going to fall behind. Right. So COVID, actually, she did amazing during that time. She, straight A's pretty much because she just needed the time and the different strategies that the school was not willing to give. And in college, they were so strict about it. And it's like, we're paying you for a service. She's not attempting to get a job right now. That's down the road. And that's what the teacher kept saying. Well, in this industry, she won't get a job doing this and that. I said, maybe she'll never get a job in this industry, but that has nothing to do with the goals of today.
Of what's happening right now. Yeah. And not only that, but I always felt like it's not for me when I was teaching my students, it wasn't for me to decide that. If they didn't make the cut, they didn't make the cut. If you taught it and they couldn't hit the grades, after doing remediation, after trying all those things with them, okay, that's a different story. But it was never for me to say, and there were some that, don't get me wrong, I had some students that graduated and I'm like, I don't know how they're going to do, but we'll see. It's almost like parenting. You have a little bit of fear, like, you hope that they get it together because they barely made it. But at the same time, like, I would always then remind myself that it wasn't my place to decide that was their journey and that was what they were going to be meant to do. All I could do was deliver the information. Yeah.
And as an employment counselor, like, we had lots of red tape we had to follow. So I understand all that part and that side, and statistics, we had to follow certain things. But the other thing I learned with that is people change their jobs so frequently nowadays. So what if they're going to school and they get this one education and they don't use it? So what?
Right.
Like, that is their decision. It's not yours. And even though I'm no longer in social work, the education that I learned from it still carries forward in other capacities. So if a kid was to take baking, like Lev was trying, it transfers over into just life. Right. If you're taking accounting, life, money. So there's so much bigger ideas that the school doesn't think about. They think very narrowly, and it makes it really hard for our kids.
And I think that that's what was heartbreaking for me at first too, because I'm very pro education. I have 3 degrees. I have 3 different degrees. I really worked really hard in advocating for Drayson. And when I started to get into the school delve more and ask questions more and realize that, okay, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, it was almost like I was grieving the educational system as well, because I was like, you kind of see tinges of where it's kind of cracked or broken, but then when you start actually dealing with it with your own child, that completely changes the story, right? And that was really difficult for me, because I still am. I love it. I believe in education. I think some of the stuff that I don't necessarily use my degrees for today, like you said, have carried on into other avenues of my life where if I hadn't had that background, I wouldn't have been able to enter this one. So I do think that there's some benefit to that, right? I know you've talked about teaching your child to fit in while still fitting out, right? That was something that was kind of mentioned. And so, which I think is such a unique thing and such a powerful way to put that concept together. So could you elaborate a little bit more on how you approach that as a parent, fit in without fitting, or while fitting out at the same time? There we go. It's like a tongue twister.
It is a tongue twister, but it's a lot of fun. So, teaching myself even, but teaching her, society does dictate some of what we need to do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you have to change who you are. So making sure that, hey, we're going to the store. No shoes, no shirt, no service, right? So something as simple as that, making sure you have your shoes, your shirt, and that way that you can get the service that you're wanting. Because, when she's at home, I'm like, dude, put some clothes on. Seriously, right? But society dictates you must wear appropriate attire. So that's fitting in. But you want to wear a funky, cool looking dress. You want to wear your funky Crocs in the middle of winter, even though your feet are going to freeze. Fine. You're 18. Have frozen feet.
Do whatever you want.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So you can still fit out and still be who you are, but there are certain constructs of society that we do need to follow. I mean, there's bills that need to be paid. We need to be able to make the money to pay the bills and be able to budget within, this is how much you have. And so there is a certain box, I guess, that we have to work within. But it doesn't mean we have to live in that box. We can live on the outside of the box and just kind of fiddle with the stuff inside the box.
Right. Which is such a great way to put it, really, honestly, because I think sometimes, I've just completely surrendered certain things thinking like socially, Drayson should fit in a different way. And if I pushed for it, it just never ended up the way I wanted it to, right? Or it would be even more catastrophic on the behavior line of things than I thought it was going to be, because I was trying to I was trying to control the situation. I was trying to, because I thought that was fitting in. And you're right. I think you start to kind of release those things like, okay, like, he got dressed and he's got on his Jack Skellington slippers and we're going to wear those to the store, but they're technically shoes and I'm just going to let it roll. Good. Right. And not be worried about the external noise, so to speak, that might be around me for that. Or, I love the downward looks I would get out, if Drayson would have a behavior to things, kind of the side eye looks you get from other parents, like you're not a good parent, you're not parenting correctly, those kinds of things. I had to learn to kind of just go, you know what? He's fine. He's still okay. He's doing his thing. Yeah. He's doing what I'm asking him to do. He's staying within that parameter, like you were saying, but he's just being him, So how do you feel?
Jump around in the aisle. Just don't knock anything over.
It's like, who cares? Like you just, you start to really kind of let go of those things because everything else is worth more, Drayson saying good morning to me or giving me a hug that day is like milestone moments compared to, the first time he ever called me mom was such a huge milestone moment that I was like, if you want to wear your Jack Skellington slippers in the store, like, go ahead. I don't care. Like he called me mom today. It's a win.
I'm having a good day.
Woo! Yeah. Or he put on clothes. Sweet. We made it. Like, it was like, it's
Right?
just those things that we take for granted. Those things make all the difference in our household. And so, all of a sudden I just started to learn not to care about the other stuff because I'd be on cloud nine,
Yeah. And you can learn to appreciate the smaller things. Like you said, woohoo, he called me mom. Woohoo, he put on some clothes. You appreciate those smaller things so much more.
I'll never forget. Here's a really funny story. I'll never forget. Drayson was probably six years old at the time, and we went to like McDonald's for breakfast, and because he liked to get pancake breakfast sometimes. So I was like, I'm going to treat you to pancake breakfast. So we went and got pancakes, and there was a little play area there, and Drayson initiated play with this little girl who he never met. There was another mom there with her little girl, and he was trying to play hide and seek with her. And I got so emotional. He was like, I think he was about 6 or 7 at the time. And he tried to ask her a question. Well, he has some anxiety. So like when she was like, why aren't you talking? He then withdrew even more because I think he was nervous. But the point of the story is that he tried, and they did. Yeah. They kind of played a little bit of hide and seek. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I was on cloud nine, got in the car. This is so funny. Got in the car, was backing out of my parking spot. Unbeknownst to me, the car behind me decided to not fully pass me by and slammed on their brakes. I ended up backing up into this car. Okay. So I got in this minor fender bender. Do you know that I did not care? I did not care. I said, exchange information. I said, and I got home and my husband was like, I can't believe you're not more upset about this. And I'm like, because it'll get fixed. I go,
yeah.
He tried to play with a little girl, like on the little playground set. He tried to play hide and seek, and he was like, "What?" I go, "Yeah, I don't give a shit about the car." Like all of a sudden,
that's
the
material.
logistics of all. Yeah, I was like, I just don't care. Like I'm still just as happy, and it was a very defining moment for me about letting go of things that normally would bother me to death. That I can't let that bother me. Yeah. And so that was a really big moment for me. But yeah, I mean, I know. And the lady was very nice, by the way. Like I apologized profusely, and she was very, very nice, and everything got squared away. But my point is that normally I would have been like, oh, and it might ruin my day. And it was like, nope, I just kept going about my day. And that was the end of it, So what would you, how do you think, what's your opinion on society doing a better job of creating more inclusive environments for individuals with autism?
That is a huge question because every part of society is so very different.
Yes.
Honestly, I think the one that would go across all aspects would be, because you mentioned this, out at the store and you get that side eye at somebody.
Mm-hmm.
If we could just not do that to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
The feeling of inclusiveness could grow from there. Because, I mean, we could say sensory room and, quiet time and dim the lights and all those other things. But honestly, the thing that keeps a lot of people out of a store or a lot of parents from taking their kids is the looks they get from other people.
Is the judgment. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we could take out the judgment, because that goes across every place in society. If we can take out those judgmental looks and comments, we would become more inclusive across the board.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've always said, finding more of that compassion and realizing that, like I remember my oldest son, Cody, this was years ago, we were at a grocery store and the person at the checkout counter, she was in a really bad mood. And you could tell she was rude, she was abrupt, she was abrasive, and Cody started to get really agitated. And I remember one time my dad said this to me when I was a kid, so I had it triggered. It was a great, I'm sure I should have told my dad, great parenting moment for him because I thought about this years later when I was in a similar situation. So thanks, Dad. But I remember we walked away from that and he said, gosh, why was she so rude? Like, that was so awful, Mom. Like, why was she so... And I didn't break. I just, stayed calm. And I said to him, I said, son, you never know what kind of a day someone's having.
Yes.
And I don't know if that was really directed at us because we didn't do anything. I'm like, think about it. What did we do to spark that? And he's like, well, we didn't do anything. Why would she? And I go, it wasn't towards us. I was like, she she's probably just having a bad day. And I think, like you said, taking out that judgment part or feeling like everything's directed towards you. I've had conversations with friends and family over the years and just learning that from some people, like some people always feel that something's being done to them and there's nothing being done to you, and it's like, maybe sometimes, but not all the time. Like and that's that emotional heightness, that emotional component that we were talking about, like we are emotionally driven. So we automatically think that, but I think that you bring up a great point about the non-judgmental piece, So you've written extensive books about mental health and autism, and I know you've done some children's books too. I want to mention that before we end the show for today, but you do have quite a few different types of books. Do you want to describe those to our listeners today?
Sure. Yeah. So, I started in the nonfiction field. Still love writing nonfiction. So there's some poetry in there as well, about mental health, raising my kid with autism. And then, because that's such heavy topics, I like to intersperse the other stuff. So some kids books. And then I also have a collection of short, scary stories that I did. And a couple of journals, like with journal prompts in there to help us get those coping strategies and get writing and get things out there. My newest book that came out last month, Thoughts of a Warrior, was the part 2 of my very first book, Thoughts of a Wanderer. So it was really cool to finally do. I always said I was going to write a part 2 to that book, and it took me, 7 years? But part 2 is out.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you're incorporating kind of a journaling aspect too for people potentially. And so when you just mentioned that right now, and I think that that's something that I haven't explored with Drayson. I would be curious to see if he would do something like that. So I think you've kind of inspired me now to maybe look further into that. As you said that, I was like, I've never had Drayson do that. I wonder if that would help him because because he is partially nonverbal. He speaks, but not all the time or in fragmented sentences. So sometimes it's hard to understand him. I wonder if he would communicate better if he was journaling.
Yeah.
I don't know, just a hypothetical.
That's how I really, I've always been a talker, but I think to express myself, I learned to do that through writing.
Right.
To be able to express myself. I definitely could not do that as a child until I learned to write. And now I can better express myself as an adult, all because of writing. And the nice thing about journaling is if you find the right journal book. So like my journals, like I said, they have these little prompts, like something I love about myself or something I want to work on. And then you can write it down. But the great thing about journaling is it could be in pictures. You could draw it. That's another way of communicating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's such a great way to put that because I wouldn't have even thought about that. See, that's where I'm like, I'm in the box, not out of the box on that one. You know what I mean? So I love that you bring that into perspective. Absolutely. That's amazing. So, before we get off the show today, what message would you give to parents? Like I said, you have provided so much hope and inspiration with your books. And for those of you listening in, just so you know, I'm going to post all of Randi-Lee's information in the show notes so that you will have access to that. So you can check out any one of her books because she's got a wide range and so many fabulous pieces that I encourage you to go check them out. But what message or values, do you hope that your readers take away from your pieces of work and any final thoughts to parents on moving forward with their child on the spectrum?
Oh, so many final thoughts. There's actually so many going through my head right now that I'm like, I'm trying to pick pieces out here. So, I mean, we've, like you said, we've talked about so much in these 2 episodes that I just want to reiterate, do your research, take your time, use the facts. Like all of those things are so empowering. Take back the power of deciding for your child. Don't let other people decide for you.
Yes,
and have
girlfriend.
your child and as best as you can, let your child advocate for themselves. Teach them how to advocate because, of course, we're always there for them. And I mean, I shared that story about the college thing, and throughout all those meetings, I let Lev take the lead every so often. I would write something down so she'd be like, oh yeah, and because I wanted her to advocate. In the final meeting, I had a little blow up at them and called them a few choice words, but
it's okay. Not a big deal.
But they a little bit deserved it. But try to teach them how to advocate. And a story I didn't share, but super quick, way back in grade 5 or grade 6, they wanted me to come in for a meeting. I said, great, we will be there. I said, well, Lev doesn't need to be there. No, we will be there. We're not having a meeting behind her back. Right. And it really depends on your child's level, how much they can understand, but for her, it was important that she be there to be able to express herself because nobody knows her better than her.
Absolutely.
So help them learn to advocate for themselves. And something I always say on my show that I think is just so applicable, I always sign off with the only way to end the stigma of mental health or autism or anything else, right, is to speak openly and honestly. Yeah. And I think it's so important that we continue to be open, that we continue to be honest.
Yeah, that's right. And you do have, that's right. I forgot. You do have a podcast, right? What's the name of your podcast?
I do. It's called The Write or Die Show. So write like you're writing something.
That's right.
Yes. So I interview mostly just other writers. I'm kind of expanded out from just authors. I've had playwrights and different things. So, and we talk about mental health.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, and we'll make sure for sure to put that in the show notes as well. For those of you listening, like I said, be sure to check out the details about Randi-Lee. Check out her books and her podcast. And if you want to reach out to her, she is available also for speaking engagements as well. Randi, I can't tell you how much I love and appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time and energy today for being on the show. I greatly appreciate you.
I loved being on here. Anytime you want me back, just let me know.
Thank you. Well, this concludes our episode for today. If you have questions, comments, or even a show topic that you'd like to hear about, please feel free to send me an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. Don't forget to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram if you haven't already, and feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. If you like what you're hearing, please spread the word to others so that this would help them out, and feel free to give us a good rating on your preferred podcast platform of choice. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, keep working on your puzzle, and remember, you don't have to have it all solved in a day. Take care.